Get started. Welcome to Denton's second webinar on crisis response for COVID-19 in the energy industry. My name is Clint Vince. I chair Denton's U.S. energy practice and co-chair our global sector. Our Denton's teammate Dave McGimpsey hosted our first webinar a few weeks ago. So much has happened in the past 2 weeks with such a high level of urgency that we felt it would be beneficial to discuss some of the critically important issues that our clients are facing right now. Our first speaker today will be Emma Hand, who will cover 4 or 5 key issues that we've been dealing with over just the past few days. Emma co-chairs Denton's global energy sector with me, and she co-chairs our COVID crisis response task force for energy. Emma also was a recent president of the Energy Bar Association. Our second speaker today is Fred Bunnywell, who is the award-winning Chief Safety and Security Officer of CPS Energy in San Antonio. Fred also heads CPS Energy's gas operations, and Paula Gold Williams, the CEO of CPS, has put Fred in charge of CPS's overall response to the COVID-19 pandemic. For the past number of weeks, Fred and I have been starting the day with emergency calls early in the morning and concluding pretty late at night. Fred has more than 30 years of professional experience, and as you'll hear shortly, he's exactly the right person for this pretty daunting role at CPS. Our third speaker is Andrew Shaw, who is a partner in our public policy practice. Andrew works very closely with Denton's energy practice, and our firm has established a 50-state tracker for all of the rules and regulations related to COVID-19 in the states, and Andrew has been a major part of that effort. Andrew will discuss the next phase of the stimulus package from an energy perspective, and also a few interesting regulatory developments. So with that, I'm going to abbreviate my introduction and just get straight into content. So Emma, if you could please start us off.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on what time zone you're in. One of the, I think really the single biggest issue that we are seeing for our utility clients at this particular moment in time is how to keep the system up and running reliably and how to keep the workplace safe for their employees. And this is a serious concern. It's not theoretical. On March 31st, Con Ed reported that it had 170 employees that had tested positive for the COVID-19 virus and 3 that had died. And we have also seen reports from DTE in Michigan and Eversource in Massachusetts that they have had employees test positive for COVID-19. So how to keep the virus out of the workplace and keep the workplace safe for the essential employees that are needed to keep the systems operating reliably is a very significant concern right now. The first and most important thing to do is to stay informed and to keep moving with the new information coming out. We are seeing recommendations that are changing on a weekly, if not a daily basis. And it's really important to make sure that you are continuing to check with the CDC, to check with state and local health departments for what the current recommendations are on how to prevent the transmission of COVID-19. Secondly, you need to be very regularly and actively getting information from your employees, asking them if they have have any symptoms of COVID-19, asking them if they know or think that they may have been exposed to someone who has or may have COVID-19 or may have been exposed to it. Educating your employees on preventing the transmission of COVID-19 and continuing to remind them and give them the tools to implement those recommendations are really important. Hand washing, masks, sanitation, social distancing. Most utilities have been doing a lot of this already, and it's important to stay on it and keep on it, and to keep updating procedures as updated guidelines come out. Figuring out which utility employees actually can work from home and enabling them to do so that you reduce the number of your workers who are exposed to the risk of COVID-19 virus is important as well. Both reducing the number of people in the workplace and allowing people to work from home where they're less likely to be exposed to the virus are very helpful for the employees that are able to work from home. And a lot of utilities, and Fred will describe what CPS is doing, but a lot of utilities are considering voluntarily sequestering critical teams so that they've got different teams of people that they know have been isolated and are safe from the virus and can continue to operate the system. You can require employees to be tested for the COVID-19 virus where it is job related and consistent with business necessity. And when you have a reasonable belief based on objective evidence that the employee's ability to perform the job would be impaired by COVID-19 or where the employee would pose a direct threat. And I think for most utility positions, that's a fairly easy standard to meet. So generally speaking, you should be good for requiring testing for COVID-19 where you have reason to think that it's necessary for a particular employee to do so. And for employees that you are on a voluntary basis sequestering. You can make that a condition of them being able to be a volunteer to be sequestered, is that they pass the COVID-19 test. ADA rules still apply though, and you have to remember that. And keep in mind that all employee medical information has to be kept confidential, and you can't ask them about other underlying health conditions while you're screening them for the COVID-19. You need to keep it focused on the issue that is posing a threat to the workplace. One of the biggest problems, of course, with all of this right now that utilities are experiencing is a shortage in supply. It's hard to get test kits. It is hard to, it's starting to become harder and harder to find masks. You know, keep apprised again of what the CDC recommendations are. With test kits, if you're not able to get test kits and you have reason to think an employee may have been exposed to COVID-19, you can require that they stay out of the workplace on paid leave until they have been tested or they have self-quarantined for 14 days or whatever the current CDC guidance is on how long someone needs to self-quarantine without showing any symptoms before they return to the workplace. Regarding masks and personal protective equipment, again, CDC is issuing on and updating on a continual basis their guidance on when masks can be reused, how to clean them, what types of masks you might use as an alternative to the N95 mask. And you want to go for the best type of face mask that you have access to. Pretty much right now what we're hearing is any mask is better than no mask, but you want to go for the best ones that you can get. And the CDC is also recommending for personnel who are really going to be interacting with the public gear like goggles and gloves. And I recommend that you take a look at what the CDC is recommending and go back and check it again once a week or every few days to make sure that you have the most updated information on that. And also something that we're seeing utilities do that I think is very helpful is issuing public statements asking customers to stay at least 6 feet away from their workers when the utility workers are out in the field. And certainly if you are sending your employees to a customer's home or place of business to deal with an issue on site that they're having, you can ask them, and it's best to communicate this to them ahead of time, that when the employee arrives at their home, if they would please stay at least 6 feet away from the employee. So that's kind of the first big set of issues that we're seeing really be at the top of people's minds right now. It's, we've got to keep the lights on to do that. We have to have healthy employees. We have to have safe employees. How do we protect our people? We have had a lot of conversation with clients about which employees are essential employees. The Department of Homeland Security issued guidance. It's not mandatory, it's just guidance that includes an initial list of critical infrastructure workers, which made it pretty clear that workers that are needed for the reliable operation of the electric, natural gas, and oil systems and public works and the like are all considered essential. State by state guidance may differ, but a lot of the states have been adopting the CDC's guidance. And we really have not been seeing significant obstacles to utilities being designated as essential workers. Now, we are seeing some utilities choose to give their employees a letter that their employees can carry around and present to law enforcement as needed. And it's always a good idea to give your employees some guidance on how to interact with law enforcement if they are stopped or approached and questioned about what they're doing. Long-term issues that we're seeing unfold that are not at front of mind now, but we can see that they are going to be coming down the road. We've had widespread suspensions of utility service disconnections for non-payment, which of course is the right thing to do when you're dealing with a human crisis like this. In order to get medical care, in order to encourage people to stay at home, people need to have electricity and power and water and natural gas service to their homes. As of April 3rd, about 32 states had issued some sort of directive suspending disconnections, and in another 16 states or so, utilities had voluntarily suspended disconnections on a widespread basis. Only about 13 of those states are waiving late fees and penalties for non-payment, but that's still a pretty significant chunk. So we're also seeing reports of spikes in non-payment of utility bills, which you would of course expect with as many people being out of work as there are. So that will eventually put some financial pressure on utilities because they have to keep providing service and they're not getting paid by a much larger percentage of their customer base than usual. We're also seeing reports from other countries that are running a little bit ahead of the U.S. that utility demand has fallen 20% or more in some areas due to the stay-at-home orders, particularly where you have high industrial and large commercial demand, and those businesses are shut down. So you're going to see develop sort of a financial pinch on utilities with reduced demand, reduced payment of the bills from the customers they are serving, and you're going to see it across the country. It's not going to be a problem with one utility here or there. It's going to be fairly widespread. This is an issue that Congress is going to have to deal with, state legislatures are going to have to deal with, regulators are going to have to deal with, figuring out how to keep utilities up and running, and who ends up paying for that, whether it's going to be taxpayers or whether it's going to be ratepayers. And Andrew Shaw is going to speak a bit about what is going on the legislative front and how people are looking at that question. But that is going to be something that we will see developing as time unfolds. And with that, I will turn it over to, I think Fred is up next.
Thanks so much, Emma. And Fred Bonniwell, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, is the Chief Security and Safety Officer for CPS Energy in San Antonio, and also heads the gas operations. So Fred, you're up.
Good morning, Clint. We appreciate the opportunity to continue to collaborate in this important time on this such an important matter. Since we last spoke 3 weeks ago, we've had several updates that I'll share here this morning, and hopefully do that succinctly and take any questions at the end for folks who'd like to ask questions. So most notably, since we spoke last, here in San Antonio, we've had spring break occur for the schools, which happened 3 weeks ago. All the schools now have been closed, most likely to the end of the year. But during that time of 3 weeks ago, we were not in the schools closed period. It happened just after folks were ready to return from spring break, fortunately. But however, unfortunately, we found that several of our employees had traveled to hot spots throughout the country through airports that have been previously identified as hot spots. So we had to put it into action fairly quickly, a process of notification and communication with our teams in the field. Required multi-layer communication and multi-repeat communications very quickly, because as most utilities, it's difficult to have an exact determination right now, exactly today at this moment, who's out on an absenteeism issue. So we had to stand up a new app fairly quickly through our IT department for reporting of absences, including folks that were out for COVID issues. So we had to do that very fast and very quickly. So we managed through the spring break week, but we had 120 folks that were subsequently quarantined coming back from spring break, so they never made it back to work. And they were, we followed the CDC guidelines on that. But one of the challenges we face is folks still, if they're on quarantine at home under certain instructions from HR, they have their own lives to lead. And so it's very difficult to control who they interact with when they're in a quarantine mode at home. So we had a couple of instances where folks ventured out, and one case in particular where an individual tried to sell a car to someone who subsequently found out where this employee worked and so forth, and then subsequently threatened to get a lawyer and so forth because the individual didn't properly disclose that he was on quarantine. So these are some of the issues that come up and are real, and is a different behavior for our employees. I don't think just in this company, but I think in most utilities where I've worked, where it's difficult to have the conversation around folks' medical condition that are part of your family. But the fact of the matter is, when we have a family member that's been tested positive for COVID and our employee discloses that, then we have to take quarantine action. But also the fact of the matter is, I can't sit here on this call and say that I know 100% positive that every family member that's indirectly connected to our employees have or haven't been tested for COVID. So that's some of the real-time challenges with this virus. So we continue to perform health checks with our employees and our staff. We've done that through our nursing group we have here in our occupational health department. We had to tap into some staff AUG nurses outside to bring them in. Fortunately, we put those orders in back in January, where we foresaw what was going to happen when we stood up our crisis on January 15th, which was way in advance of any of the orders coming from the CDC or from the White House. And if we hadn't done it in January, there's no way we would have been able to attain additional nursing support. Most utilities have eliminated nurses from their staffs many years ago, but fortunately we were one of the few that still have them. So it enabled us to assist our workforce significantly in assisting them to be aware of what their conditions are. So we continue to move the health screenings throughout every area of the company. We rotate that, but because we don't have enough nurses to properly do that at every facility, it makes it very difficult. So we've also had to rely on self-checks. And there's a lot of companies that are using inappropriate temperature check devices. Some companies are using infrared devices that you would use to test the temperature of your car. Those are not medically certified, and they're not acceptable to use with employees or for patients. So we're using the ear thermometers that are, you don't need the contact, but we still clean them, and they're all utilized by our nursing staff. So we're continuing to expand that. We found additional nurses, so hopefully as we bring them on in the coming weeks, we'll be able to keep nurses stationed at our service district operations in the field to provide for daily instantaneous support to our people when they need it. So those things continue. I'd say to close that portion of it out, we've had up to 10% of the workforce being out on quarantine, just in terms of giving you some sense of what the impact has been. So the other thing I'll say is, for 2 weeks now, our crisis team 2 weeks ago took up the action to divide our workforce into 3 teams. We have the blue team, which is field distance essential personnel. These are primarily those that work in the field, or skilled craft as we refer to them as. And for example, in the gas department, which I'm ultimately responsible for, about 80% of the gas department is either working from home or they are dispatched from home. So very little of the work comes in. I think most of what does come in to the center is for gas leak repair, where you have to maintain a significant amount of materials and supplies on the trucks. But even today, we're actually taking further actions to split those crews up even further into some other properties that we own that are fully secured, where we can still separate our employees as much as possible. Our white team is our office essential. These individuals need to be on site from time to time. There are very few, such as our occupational health department, our safety specialists on a rotating basis, and our senior chiefs on a rotating basis that report to our president and CEO. And then lastly is the orange team, and those are distance support personnel. These are members of our team that can work predominantly from home, but we found out there's a lot of challenges with that. Engineers can work from home, but they typically need 2 monitors to do that. We also have to make sure that we have the RSA tokens. So in the beginning, when we first went live with this, we had a drawdown on our system within IT. So we have a WebEx system for conference calls, and we had to counsel and coach our folks to utilize the iPhone function, and instead of using it from their iPad or from the mainframe that was going to draw down the system usage. So those are some of the techniques and challenges we've had along the way. So about 80% of our workforce, as I speak, are working from home, and hopefully we can get that number up even further. So the other thing, the last area that I'll cover that we're working on now is there are only really 2 utilities that I'm aware of that are sequestered. And we are working to sequester our critical employees here probably by next week. Our power marketing function, our system operators, and our control room operators, along with our INC techs and critical maintenance functions. So I have about 160 people that we'll put in sequester, and we'll do this on a phased-in basis. So we've been able to tap into our military resources to provide for our employees COVID test before they go into sequester, because most folks have to wait 9 days, or if they order the kits, it takes a long period of time, and it makes sequestering very challenging. But because our number one customer is Joint Base San Antonio, which is the largest joint base operation in the U.S., we have several projects with them now, and it enables us to tap into the military contact to allow us to get access to the COVID test. So we are moving forward with this. We'll probably start with a hoteling function. Most of the hotels in San Antonio are closed, but we have relationships with them where we might be able to open up a hotel and coordinate it off to our folks only. It requires a lot of reconnaissance in terms of cleaning staff, observation of the cooking staff, but you would still have that even if you had a campsite or a camper site. NIPA has already experienced. We're gonna do this. We feel that the insidious nature of this virus is such that it's very difficult to draw on a trigger on the when to pull the string for sequestration, because this is such insidious and it's all around us. And the indirect exposure that we've seen with some near misses makes the control of this virus very difficult. So we're going to have to enact this very soon. But we'll keep you informed along the way of what we do, and maybe in a further update in the next couple of weeks can provide for further information and insight into how this process is going. But we are a 24/7 business. We are public facing. We were one of the first utilities to suspend the activity of turning off customers. That happened about a month ago. So we have a CEO here that's very proactive and very much leans into what we have to do to maintain our public facing, but doing this in such a way that we mitigate as much of the risk as possible to our people. So Clint, that's my piece that I'd like to share, and I'll turn it back to you.
Fred, we deeply appreciate your being with us today. I know what your days are like from firsthand experience, and we're really grateful for the guidance and advice you've just provided. I hope it's going to be helpful to a lot of other utilities and energy providers. We're going to turn in a moment to Andrew Shaw, who is a partner in our public policy practice, to talk about what's expected in the next phase of the stimulus package, and also comment on a few important regulatory developments. Let me mention to folks, the participants listening in, if you do have questions, we will take them in writing. Just go into the chat room and write out your question, and then I will read it to our panelists and have them respond. So with that, Andrew, could you proceed, please?
Well, thanks, Clint, and nice to be with everyone today. I hope everyone is doing okay under the circumstances in these difficult and uncertain times. As Clint mentioned, I am going to be looking at what Congress and the federal government may be doing in response to the COVID-19 crisis with respect to the energy industry. I think at the outset, it is worth looking back at what Congress has done just briefly to be able to understand where lawmakers may be headed in a Phase 4 bill. As folks probably know, Congress has passed 3 bills in response to the current crisis, including the CARES Act, referred to as the Phase 3 bill several weeks ago. I think what's notable about that is that despite the partisanship Congress moved quickly, at least by Congress's standards, and in a overwhelmingly bipartisan basis. Energy was in the mix, particularly on the CARES Act, but ultimately there were not explicit references or provisions dealing with energy in the CARES Act. As to the CARES Act, just a brief summary, there was support for individuals through increased unemployment insurance and individual checks. Another big provision in the CARES Act was related to assistance for small businesses for what's been being called as the Paycheck Protection Program. And then the last big program is an economic $500 billion economic stabilization fund through the Treasury Department. That summary is instructful because we're now seeing the contours of what phase 4 may look like. Over the last week or so, we've seen congressional leaders put out their initial feelers as to what a phase 4 bill would look like, and we've seen them both recalibrate those statements in recent days. For instance, Speaker Pelosi last week initially called for a phase 4 bill to include $760 billion for infrastructure. The House Democrats put out a moving forward infrastructure blueprint earlier this year that I'll touch on in a little bit. Subsequent to those initial comments, Speaker Pelosi has said that a phase 4 bill will actually build upon some of the measures in the phase 3 program, including extending unemployment, more checks to individual citizens, and extending the Small Business Paycheck Protection Program. For his part, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell initially said that a phase 4 bill may not be necessary and that Congress should wait until we see how the phase 3 bill is implemented. McConnell has backtracked in recent days, and in fact, earlier today, he is looking to move by unanimous consent provisions giving more funding for the small business portions. President Trump, on his end, has actually come out in support of a big infrastructure bill, but his administration has yet to provide any details on what that package would look like. As to specific energy provisions, in the phase 3 bill, there was discussion about purchases of crude oil for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to help out the struggling oil and gas sector. That did not make it into the phase 3 bill. Also, there were discussions about extending deadlines for renewable energy projects, specifically continuity safe harbor deadlines that have for projects where supply chain disruptions have hurt developers' abilities to be able to qualify for the wind production tax credit and the solar investment tax credit. We've seen in the past, as we look forward to a phase 4 and beyond legislation, we've seen a trade-off before between oil and gas and renewables, most specifically in 2015, when the crude oil export ban was lifted and the wind production tax credit and solar ITC were extended. I think we can expect similar discussions about that in a phase 4 or phase 5 bill as well. Another area to focus on in the response bills is an issue that Emma flagged earlier. A lot of utilities, particularly rural co-ops, are having challenges with requirements by state utility commissions to maintain service, but also having decreasing demand and having some some ratepayers not paying their bills, which is creating some liquidity challenges. We have seen calls for federal support to be able to help utilities get through this challenging circumstances in which they are providing service as many folks are sequestered at home. Similar to that, we have also seen calls to allow rural co-ops to be able to refinance loans and to bolster USDA funding for rural co-ops. There have also been calls to expedite the process under FEMA to get disaster relief out quicker. Utilities can generally access those funds, but there have been complaints about the speed in which historically those funds get out the door. Another big area that I referenced earlier is infrastructure. As I noted, infrastructure was a key pillar initially of Speaker Pelosi's Phase 4 plan. While I think right now infrastructure is going to take a back seat to more pressing needs, I think infrastructure will be in the mix as we look forward to potential bills after this Phase 4 bill. House Democrats, in talking about infrastructure, have focused on things like grid modernization, infrastructure for smart cities and communities, expanding rural broadband, and deploying more clean energy and bolstering clean water resources. I will say that we may see certain aspects of the infrastructure package try to find their way into initial bill, particularly as it relates to rural utilities. It is a priority of House Energy and Commerce Chairman Frank Pallone to be able to address some of the challenges that rural utilities are facing. And there's also a recognition of some of the challenges with more folks being at home about bolstering broadband as well. Moving on, as Clint noted, there are also some regulatory developments that are worth noting as well. EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, issued a guidance late last month indicating that they would defer compliance and enforcement in certain circumstances where COVID-19 was the cause of a violation. These circumstances include routine compliance monitoring and reporting, but also violations of air, water, or waste standards, again, provided if COVID-19 was the cause of noncompliance. FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has also taken other regulatory relief measures in recent weeks. Last week, they put out a notice that they would put highest priority on expediting rate making and rulemaking that's needed to keep energy operations reliable in this current environment. FERC and NERC have also suspended some audits for utilities with respect to compliance with reliability standards. Finally, with respect to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they have also issued some exemptions that on rules that limit the hours that workers can be on site to be able to deal to make sure that nuclear operators have the staff there necessary to maintain operations. In summary, before turning it back to Clint and the group, clearly this is a very fluid situation with respect to the crisis, and Congress and the federal government's response to it. Encourage all that are facing issues to remain engaged with their trade associations and elected officials. With that, I will turn it back over to Clint.
Andrew, thanks so much, and to each of our panelists. Just a great job today. We do have a couple of questions that have come in, and a reminder that if you would like to ask a question, just put it into the chat room. Andrew, in terms of timing, I know that Congress is out at least until the 20th, but is it your impression that things are moving pretty fast now and that the staffs of the authorizing committees are working apace, and that now really is the time to, if you would like to have an impact on the next phase of stimulus, now is the time to get in and do that?
Yeah, no, I think that right now is definitely the time. As you noted, Congress is out until April 20th, but Speaker Pelosi indicated that she wants to pass a Phase 4 bill by the end of April. We also saw Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell try to indicate that he wants to move some SBA-related measures by unanimous consent. So Congress, by their standards, is working at warp speed. I would also note that this Phase 4 bill, as I said earlier, is not going to be the only measure. Congress is going to will probably get this Phase 4 bill done pretty quickly, but there'll be a Phase 5 and probably beyond as we deal with the economic toll and then try to consider what economic stimulus measures are necessary to get the economy back up and running.
We've seen some very helpful communications from Tom Kuhn, the head of Edison Electric Institute, from NRECA on some of the topics you've been discussing. Andrew, we have a question. I think you indicated an answer. The question is, do utilities have access to federal funds under the recent COVID-19 legislation for customer unpaid bills? And as a continuation of that question, or any other expenses related to responding to the COVID-19 pandemic? I believe your answer, Andrew, was that not yet in the third phase, but that the utility industry across the board has been weighing in, seeking help on exactly the issue specified. Is that correct?
Well, I think there wasn't direct assistance for utilities in the Phase 3 bill, but the small business program could help with some expenses that utilities might be facing, not dealing with unpaid bills per se, but helping with other expenses as well. But the specific issue of helping utilities with utility bills that haven't been paid is something that lawmakers are likely going to need to address in a Phase 4, Phase 5 bill.
Thanks, Andrew. Fred Bunnywell, one thing we were discussing last night was the how to protect some of your workers that are going into homes to assist, for example, with lighting pilot lights. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, Clint. Thank you. So, as a matter of course, over many years, we have, on our gas troubleshooters, taken advantage of the opportunity to allow our customers the ability to interface with us, and we go in when we're asked to relight a pilot, for example, that some companies don't do that. And then in addition to that, there are times, of course, when we're investigating a matter that involves the gas service that we have to go into the house. Up until the time of this COVID era that we're in, this an activity where we would require, through normal work, for our employees that were considered gas troubleshooters to wear or don a respirator per se. But because of the insidious nature of this virus and the outbreaks that we've seen, we can't take for granted that they're going to go into a home and not become in contact in some way, potentially, with that. So as a matter of response to this, we have provided a training video for all such personnel that are going to be in the house to relight the pilot or home for other reasons. And we train them on how to acclimate themselves appropriately to engage in the customer conversation. It's all about the customer experience, as we say. So it's not like we're going to send somebody up to the doorstep with a moon suit on. That is probably overkill. But what is appropriate is to go up there with the appropriate PPE, hard hat, gloves, safety glasses, the normal wearables, but then to have the respirator directly on their person and explain how they're going to put that on, put it on before they go into the home, and to engage the customer with the right kind of conversation about what they're getting ready to do and why. And explain to the customer also that safety and health of our employees and the customers is our #1 value. And this is why we're taking the extra extreme to make sure that, for example, we're maintaining the 6-foot distance as we enter the home, and we ask the customer to please acknowledge that and help us in that regard. So we are requiring our employees that do such work to wear the N95 respirator. We realize that there are challenges with that with the medical community, but quite frankly, as a safety professional at heart, I can't put our troubleshooters in a situation where they're going to wear a bandana or they're going to wear a surgical mask, and it could compromise their own health and safety. The other area that I would indicate where we've done this in speaking with other utilities is a lot of times our field foremen engage in conversations with the customers about down wires and particular problems associated with why their crew is there at the house or the property. And that is also a crew that wears the N95 for such periods that we're in right now in the COVID-19 response. They're provided that anyway as standard issue as part of their safety kit as a foreman because of other types of activities that they could become engaged in from time to time. So I know I went around the block to get next door with that answer, but hopefully that shed.
You know, I think it's really important to get into that level of detail because this is fast developing, and we have not, you know, a lot of these issues just have never been confronted before. Fred, we have time for one last quick question. We're running a little bit over on our time, but it's a question that is so well suited for your role as Chief Security Officer of CPS. The question is, how significant are new cybersecurity challenges for utilities as a result of COVID-19 and a number of recent ransomware attacks and other challenges? Could you give us a quick summary of some of the challenges CPS is facing, and then we will need to close out?
Yes, thank you, Clint. So yes, we've seen #1 is a significant ramp up in the level of hits to our firewall from nation states. since the middle part of January. So on average, prior to January, we were averaging about 1.5 million hits a day to our firewall, and that now is at 3 million minimum. So nation states and threat actors are trying to take advantage of the fact that they believe that we are distracted from our normal course of business, and now is the time to take the prey, for example. But so far, knock on wood, a lot of the preventative things that we put in place have really prevailed well during these times. We have sensors on all of our devices in the field, as well as sensors on our mainframe, so we can monitor through a virtual mailbox everything that's going on in real time, and anything that's detected to be questionable is held in a separate account. So it creates like a honey net, if you will. That's number one. Number two, we've seen a significant rise in folks trying to posture themselves as a CPS customer account executive, asking or demanding for payment to a fake website through a phone source that is usually not properly anchored. So through a level of questioning, we can dissuade some of that or make them hang up, but we've had instances where our customers have been threatened during this period, and we've had a couple of instances where customers have paid inappropriately to these websites and so forth. So that's another area where we've seen. The third area, we're in downtown San Antonio, which is abandoned for the most part as we speak. So we've seen a significant rise in general threats from folks that are, street people. They've compromised a couple times some of our folks walk into their car at night. So we've provided for a security escort if they need that or if they want that. All they have to do is call our Security Operations Center, which is observed 24/7. So we've had a lot of issues where they've attempted to steal property and so forth during this period. But those are the top three things we've seen, Clint.
Fred Bunnywell, Emma Hand, Andrew Shaw, great job today. Thank you. For those that have additional questions or would like to communicate with our Crisis Response Task Force, just shoot Emma Hand or me your questions by email, and we'll do our best to get you responses or put you in touch with sources that might be helpful to you. So I wish you all a great afternoon. I hope you stay safe and sound, and that you're being extra careful. Thank you all. Have a great day.